Smoke signals from around the campfire.
So the course you're doing, Matt, do you want to get straight into that?
Yeah, I'll create a little bit of context. I'm a great believer in using the idea of context and relationship as a start point to almost everything. And in fact, if one wants to know whether one is residing or tending towards the left or the right hemisphere of the brain, then simply apply context and relationship to take you towards the right side of the brain's activities. It's a great balancing thing. So context is, my background is I'm a musician. I started as a session guitarist in the 90s, played in the pop scene for many years, did a lot of touring, a lot of television and radio. Felt slightly burnt out by the touring and based myself in a studio for a number of years, writing music for television and computer games, which was the commercial art of the moment and a good way to earn a living. Started exploring music as a healing tool, got very interested in the history of music as a shamanic tool, as a healing tool, basically anything other than entertainment, which is really the origins of music, going right back to the origins of language and speech, and this idea that music or singing is the earliest form of language that we emotively expressed through a sound that could be described as closer to a song than language before we had the meaning of language, which took away a certain amount of the emotiveness of how we communicated as early humans. I have been working for the last nearly 3 years now on a research project, partly as a coach. I'm a qualified coach, and the course that I'm facilitating really taps into the coaching side of what I do. Coaching being a good way for me to share what I've learned as a creative over the years. The research is very pertinent to hosting the Artist's Way and in creativity in general, because the research project was on behalf of 2 very large charities in the UK to look at the impacts of, well, first of all, to establish attitudes in young people, 18 to 25-year-olds, loosely described as Gen Z, their attitudes to social change and causes, giving to causes, engaging with causes, wanting to see change, how they felt about it. So trying to get an understanding of their empowerment or disempowerment around that. And that also led into understanding how they talk to each other, how they communicate their ideas, which inevitably took us into understanding their engagement with social media, which obviously dominates just about everybody's exchanges these days. And what we found out was the impact of social media is significant and not very positive, especially in terms of this constant truncated forms of exchange and a pattern over the history of social media of shorter and shorter content forms, where platforms are not just encouraging shorter expression, they're actually enforcing it by making the amount of time available for any given post to become shorter and shorter and putting more and more limitations on it. So speeding up the frequency of engagement, but disabling the ability to go into depth and detail. And what that means in psychological terms is that we have a generation of young people coming through whose attention spans have been dramatically interfered with, and in a very negative way. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because attentiveness, how we attend to the world, how we notice the world around us, and then how we reflect that back to each other, is absolutely central, not just to our personal wellness, but to the way we engage and to the way we process ideas. In other words, if you're constantly operating in a paradigm where you're being cut short or encouraged to be cut short, or, as I alluded to earlier, working in a paradigm of brevity, where it's useful to be concise, it also doesn't allow you to meander and explore and reach different conclusions. One tends to step towards absolutes very quickly, and absolutes can be very polarizing. And that creates oppositional energies between people, and ultimately what you get is a very disharmonious community or society. So the work that I did in this research led us to conclusions that there is a need to help young people to express and engage in more long form ways, but there's also a need to use the technologies that are around us to help them do that. So really what we're looking at is trying to find out how we can hack technology in order to re-empower young people. And that's where our energy's gone. And now we're working on creative ideas to do that. And we will be working with young people to get so that they're driving the whole project. So that's what I've been doing for the last 35 years, and in particular the last 3 years, this research. Why run a course on creativity that's now 35, 40 years old? Well, because the Artist's Way, it's a 12-week course, and I'm starting it on the 20th of September, is, from my experience and everything that I've seen in terms of facilitated creative processes, simply the best. I mean, no one has surpassed this as a work that taps into the absolute fundamentals of what creativity is, why it's important to every single individual, not just people that think they're creatives, not just artists, but absolutely everybody, the fundamental nature of what creativity is, its spiritual dimension. And I recognize that spiritual is a saturated use word that gets applied to all sorts of situations, but really what that means to me is that creativity is one of the fundamental tools through which we recognize our association and connection to the bigger picture of all things, to each other, to the planet, to the history of ideas, to the evolution of our societies and communities. And so Julia Cameron has really created a masterpiece. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the specifics of the Artist's Way in a second. What I want to do right now is just look at this idea of creativity as a way of setting the scene, and starting by something that I mused on this morning in my swim and my cycle ride to and from the beach, which is, what is creativity? And what is imagination, and how do we get to understand it? And I realized that it's something that's very hard to just sort of encapsulate in brevity, in an overly concise form. I mean, we can all come up with some fairly sort of accessible and simple suggestions as to what it is. But in trying to identify it, I asked myself, what if there was no creativity? If we take it away, if we imagined a world that didn't have creativity, what would that look like? That helps us to understand it perhaps more comprehensively. And I started writing a list of what we would not have if we didn't have creativity. And it was a real revelation, actually. I didn't realize quite how fundamental it is. I tell everybody it is, but I didn't realize myself that actually being alive, being a human being who is alive, is the ultimate act of creativity. In other words, it is 100% fundamental to our existence. So I wrote a list. I do everything in mind maps. I'm surrounded by mind maps. And the reason I use mind maps is that they're a way of putting a central idea in the middle of a page and then going off into all sorts of tangents. It breaks up linear thinking, which is another sort of creative tool, if you like. And on the right-hand side, I just wrote down a list of what happens if we take creativity away. And at the top, I put, to define creativity, take it out of your life and see what's left. And the first thought that came to me was actually quite strange. And it was a reflection on my brother-in-law, who's one of the most hardworking, decent human beings I've met in my life. And he was my best friend at school and then married my sister. And he whistles all the time. He whistles when he works, that old cliche. And the first thing that popped into my head was, if there was no creativity, Neil would not whistle, because it's a totally immersed form of spontaneous creation. When he whistles, he starts with a well-known tune and then off he goes. And he's quite often, I see him working. He's a carpenter and an electrician, and I'll see him walking past me and he'll be whistling, and it always starts as something I recognize, and it goes off into this sort of musical noodling. He's improvising. So there'd be no whistling at work. There'd be no spontaneous breaking out into humming and if you like, audio doodling or musical doodling. Obviously, there would be no things like sculpture, poetry, big musical works, great works of paintings and, visual arts. There would be no blockbuster movies. There would be no small independent movies. There would be no literature. I mean, that's the obvious stuff. But when we start to look at the more personalized behavioral things that either become limited or just vanish, it starts to become really interesting. There would be no stories. That means we'd have a very limited way of communicating with each other. There would be very little, if no, humor. Humor is creativity, and creativity is humor. Take creativity away, humor almost vanishes. I mean, a lot of humor is based on aping or parody and satire, but the fundamental component of that is spontaneous metaphorical expression. In other words, we take an idea and we turn it into something else. And it's the humor that comes out of a perspective. All humor is perspective, and it's a very creative act and process in and of itself. There would be no doodling. I'm a great doodler. I doodle all the time, especially when I'm on phone calls or Zoom calls. If we didn't have creativity as a primal or fundamental function of our existence, we wouldn't do things like that. There'd be no whistling, no doodling. We live in a sort of Spock-like paradigm where everything would be reduced to reason and logic, and anything outside of that would be incomprehensible. We wouldn't be able to understand it. One of the reasons we wouldn't be able to understand it is because there'd be very little room for metaphor. Without creativity, we can't engage in metaphor. And metaphor is how we create abstract comparatives, how we tell about the existence of something in a way that offers a new perspective. And it's very important in terms of how we create realization. If you take metaphor away, there's no realizations, and there's no sharing of realizations, or certainly a limited sharing. No satire, I've mentioned, no visual art, no music, no dreams. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I mean, we don't have a cast iron definition of what dreams are. And perhaps that gives a clue to what it is about life and consciousness that is fundamentally creative, because a dream is not something we can dictate. It's something that occurs. It's often metaphorical. It often collides images, sounds, dynamics, and feelings in ways that are abstract and nonsensical. It's an inner projection. It's a movie in the mind while we're sleeping. Some people think dreams are the closest we get to tapping into, seeing, revealing, or experiencing universal consciousness. In other words, it's a gateway to the connected mind of the universe. It's questionable as to whether we'd dream if we had no creativity. I mean, my feeling as I say that is that actually that's a chicken and egg situation, that creativity is a subset of dreams. I mean, if you look at Aboriginal culture, Australian Aboriginal culture, the notion of dreaming taps into the notion of creation, the big creation. And so a mystical portal starts to open up. When we remove creativity from our daily existence, we suddenly realize potentially it's a fundamental component of consciousness and universal consciousness. Potentially. I mean, I'm not talking absolutes here. I can't. I'm not qualified, and not one of us has all the information about everything. So I'm just musing on this. Musing, the muses, the Greek gods. Mnemosyne was the mother of the muses, and very interesting that creativity as displayed or explained through the muses is dependent upon memory. And so creativity and memory are interwoven. If memory is the archive of all our experiences, when we start to use our imagination and we become creative, we're opening the door to the library of all our experiences, and possibly the experiences of our ancestors, because it's absolutely proven and true that we store ancestral memory. Quite what the mechanism for that is, we don't understand. It's somehow in the DNA, but it reaches our consciousness in different ways. It also manifests itself in our abilities or our limitations. One may have a capacity for something that relates to an ancestral capacity. You might come from a long line of carpenters, to talk about my brother-in-law, which he does. So lineage also includes memory, which therefore affects our creative capacity. You can't create without memory. It's fundamental. There would be no spontaneity. I just dwell on this for a moment. No spontaneity. In other words, the capacity for spontaneity is dependent on a creative or imaginative mind or urge. You're going to do something that's not pre-planned. You're going to do something that is not organized, considered, and preordained. And this is why humor is so important. When you hang out with someone who is naturally humorous, naturally funny, it's the spontaneity of their expression that's sparky, that gives it life. And so spontaneity and creativity are interwoven in the same way as creativity and memory are interwoven. When we start to engage in a regular creative practice, in other words, when we allow ourselves to be spontaneous through a creative focus, could be doodling, it could be morning pages, and I'll talk about that in a moment because that's a part of the artist's way. When we unlock that part of our capacity, of our ability, it starts to reflect itself in our outer lives as well. What you practice at home on your own or in a group with other people then starts to become part of your natural makeup and your natural engagement with the outside world. Life starts to become more spontaneous. And in spontaneity, we find synchronicity. In other words, through spontaneous actions, we start to collide with things that are perhaps coming from the back of our mind, the subconscious of our mind, or things that we've been looking for or seeking, or things which resonate. So what we're starting to see is that creativity has a huge bearing on our day-to-day existence and what we might loosely call the magic of our existence, because if we're bringing spontaneity, memory, free expression, and then synchronicity into our lives, we're starting to live a much more authentic existence. It starts to resonate on a soul level. We're doing what we're meant to be doing. It's almost like we're dancing with positive fate. Whether we're engaging with that willfully, in other words, we're making this or manifesting this life, again, is open to discussion and debate. I don't know if that's 100% true. I think it's actually a dance between fate and free will. I think what we do is we maneuver between things that we want to do, and then the universe and reality pushes back in some way and we slightly alter our course. So it's a bit like tacking in the wind when you're sailing. You know where you want to get to, or you have an instinct about where you want to get to, but negotiating life starts to become a sort of well, just that, a negotiation between that which is around you and that which you are imagining or dreaming. Intuition, no creativity, no intuition. A mutual friend, Jonathan Layton, talks about ethics, and when he describes ethics, he talks about the push and pull of the rational mind versus the intuitive mind. And we immediately get a picture of the rational needing data, facts, validation, evidence, a body of evidence in order to recognize a pattern or trend and then be sure about a process or an assumption or a decision. Whereas intuition starts with the assumption and then backfills if it needs to. It's actually most interesting when you don't backfill. In other words, you make an intuitive choice and then you just keep going with the next intuitive choice, and you don't bother to explain why and how you've got there. You just keep going. You just keep following hunch after hunch after hunch and leave it to other people to backfill the left brain or rational mind's requirements of describing with evidence. If we remove intuition, we get into danger. I really believe that. You know, counterintuitive or intuitive or against the norm is where you start to experience decisions that are somehow guided beyond data. They're guided beyond rational fact. And intuition is really what you're cultivating every time you engage in a creative practice. You're honing your capacity for intuition, because if you think about a doodle, as you move the pen or the pencil around the page, and you're not applying the rational mind to it. If, like me, you doodle when you're on a Zoom call or a phone call, what will happen is that your rational mind is engaging with a sort of surface level dealing with process, business, getting on with stuff. And your subconscious mind is seeking some sort of satisfaction. It's a bit like the inner child is going, hey, what about me? I want to be heard or seen or acknowledged, because this stuff you're dealing with is really boring and dull and actually predictable. And so the doodling becomes the free will satisfaction, the child at play through the pen in the hand or the pencil in the hand. And you're plotting, well, you're not plotting, are you? You're just going from intuitive hunch to intuitive hunch, because the beauty of doodling is you generally don't know what you're going to end up with. And if you hone your capacity for doodling as an approach, what you're doing is you're honing your intuition. You're just making a series of intuitive stabs or movements, hand to subconscious mind. Sometimes a doodle will actually reveal something. In fact, with me, it very often does. I'll come up with images. I've actually doodled predictive images where I've drawn a place or a scene, and then that's become manifest a few weeks or months later. And it's like, wow, I drew that. You know, how did that happen? So who knows what we tap into when we allow those intuitive, spontaneous activities. If we look at the other side of this, what is a world that only has rationality like? I mean, it's actually quite frightening to think what a world that is only rational. What does it look like? What I get in my head is almost fascism. Experiential fascism, let's call it. I'm talking metaphorical, I'm not talking politically. I'm talking about this idea that if you remove spontaneous expression, surely you're taking all the color metaphorically out of life. You know, a world full of Spocks, it's illogical, it's irrational, therefore it has no validity. Well, that would be a dreadfully cold existence. It's also fear-based, isn't it? Where you're fearful of anything that isn't backed up by data. That removes magic, it removes free will, it removes color in all its forms from our existence. So no, thank you. I don't want an only rational existence. And that's not to say that rationality isn't valid or useful. I mean, the point about this is it's different modus operandi, where and how they exist. Why that matters? Because we are now living in a left brain paradigm. Those of us that grew up before the internet and before the digital revolution will recognize the changes that have gone on. Without any shadow of a doubt, social media in particular, but the internet in general, is a left brain framework. It is all about freezing time, gathering data, and validating through information and factual information. And all the tensions and the polarization come from the battleground of what is fact, what is not fact, what is real, what is valid opinion, and what isn't. And so it's creating this tendency to lean us towards validation and towards a rational justification of the world around us. It's not a creative place. Now that's unusual, isn't it? And it's paradoxical because I also write in the mornings and I post things onto social media, but I do try to keep them coming from a place of free form, so that they're spontaneous. I mean, I don't pattern it. I don't post every day. I don't post at the same time every day. I don't know if that kind of regularity is useful. If you don't have something to say, why would you say it? But turning up is another thing. We'll talk about that in a second. I'll talk about it because I'm doing the chatting here. No understanding and connection to the forces of nature. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but if we reflect on the fact that the world around us is in a constant state of change, the natural world is rarely static, although I've been told that on new moons and full moons, there's a brief moment where all cellular life is momentarily held in stasis, that there's no growth or decay, momentarily, probably at the fullness of a new moon and the fullness of a full moon. But as a safe bet, everything in the world around us is in constant change. In fact, nature's promise to us is constant change. That's what it gives us. And so if everything around us is in a constant state of change, it's in a constant creative dance. If you look at how things grow in the plant world, yes, there's patterns and yes, there's tendencies, but ultimately it's seeking something. And what it's seeking is a form of collective equilibrium. And so creative function and equilibrium work together. Perhaps what we do when we create is we're trying to find some sense of soulful equilibrium or inner equilibrium, that maybe we've gathered experiences throughout the day or the week or the month or our entire life, and all of a sudden those experiences need to be expressed. We're carrying baggage. So catharsis through creativity, which is often the first place that people come to with it, was very cathartic to do this, whether it was dance or whether it was sculpture or whether it was writing or jamming music, it's cathartic. Why do we need catharsis? Because we gather experiences and we hold them, we embody them, and we need to seek equilibrium to balance it out by getting them out of our system. So in doing that, we're in a state of biomimicry. We're copying nature, we're copying the world around us. We're engaged in spontaneous creative expression in the quest for equilibrium. In this case, it's personal equilibrium. No reflection. Again, I don't know if that's fully true, but I wrote it down, so I'm just going to spontaneously reflect on that. What is reflection? Reflection is the ability to look back over events using the memory. So it must be connected to creativity somehow if we're tapping into the memory archive, and look at it from a number of different perspectives. Reflectiveness is the capacity to look at an event or a situation or an entity of some sort from a number of different perspectives to gain better understanding of it. Now, what's interesting about that is that's exactly what we do when we experience a piece of art. We look at it from a number of different perspectives. We look at it in different ways to get a better holistic understanding of it. And in some ways, the reverse is true again, in that when we express an art, a piece of art, a piece of creativity, we're trying to get an understanding from the subconscious mind. It's not a conscious decision. I must understand this, therefore I'll write something about it, or I'll create from it. We could do that, but generally it's coming from an exploration of a darkness, a shadow, which then reveals itself. And the minute it's revealed itself, it's no longer in the act of creativity, and it then belongs to the universe. It doesn't belong to us anymore. When you complete a piece of art, you are letting it go, you're moving it on. That's why catharsis is important, and that's why reflection would probably diminish if it didn't evaporate without creativity. It would disappear, or at least diminish. No games or sport. Well, someone had to invent a game at some point, and games and sport are very interesting. And if you remove the slightly negative connotation of competition, although it does have its healthy attributes and needs, then games are often something that co-evolve, and evolve is the key word. If you look at the child at play or a group of children at play, they seem to have a limitless capacity for creating healthy rules and conditions, but abstract ones. When they make a game, they create a societal version of existence in play form. They're playing with the idea of their existence, but the rules that they engage with seem to come from nowhere but make complete logical sense to a child. And so the creation of games is an extremely creative act, and it's an absolutely fundamental act. And what we get a glimpse of there is the link into the artist's way as a course, which is this idea that the child at play is the aspiration. We want to get back to a state of being a child at play. And I'll just write down a few things that I put on the left side of the page under the heading of the child at play, and then I'll talk the specifics of the artist's way itself. So the child at play, and a personal reflection to begin with. When I was about 6 years old, I had imaginary friends who were sort of other dimensional pixies of some sort, very friendly. They had no agenda. They turned up in my imagination at will, as in they appeared when they wanted to appear. Obviously, it was a conspiracy with my imagination of some sort. But it was the name that I gave them that was the magical thing. They were called googly nunks, and I have no idea where or how or why that name appeared. But my parents told me that the googly nunks were extremely real for a short period of my life, that I had absolute belief in them. It was unquestionable that they didn't exist. And the name resonated with the vibe of what they were about. Googly, kind of giggly, sounds like fun. Nunks, some sort of spiritual component, giggly nuns is possibly another way of describing them. But there in the imagination of the child, these beings appeared and they represented the spirit of play. That's how I choose to interpret it. So the spirit of play is what the child specializes in, what we often lose as we grow up and grow old, and why Julia Cameron's work is an act of genius, because it reconnects us to that, and it creates vitality as a result. Story is at the heart of the child at play. If you observe children at play, and psychological study and practice often involves various discussions and studies of children at play, story or narratives of one form or another with these conditions and rules is central to it. And discovery, when children play, they get to discover things, and there are urges and drives of discovery, which are unique individual by individual, but often come together in a collective form, especially when they create a game. So it's almost like society saying, I want the rules of life to be like this because this is what matters to me personally. Now that's really, really important. That's a fundamental of building community and creating society in a harmonious way. And so if we lose the notion of play from that functionality, it's no longer truly democratic. It's no longer a playful exploration of what works for everybody. So we see somehow that there's something really important about this rediscovery or reconnection to the idea of play. It becomes much more important than just some sort of personal salvation or reconnection. It starts to become something that is important for survival at a communal level or a societal level. It's about adaptability. Children at play are constantly adapting their reality in ways that are limitless and unbounded. Now that is amazing, because adaptability is the #1 key component of evolution and survivability. Humanity has survived because of its ability to adapt. That comes from a sense of play. Take that away, you're not going to adapt to a challenge. We need our creatives to deal with what's going on with climate change and the collapse of society right now. It's absolutely fundamental. And if we have a technocracy evolving which seems to have an agenda of limiting creativity, well, then we really are in fascism. I can't see it any other way. We're having our democracy removed from us at a fundamental level, the ability to playfully engage with the rules of life, which is what creativity is. Projection. Any item in a child's story can be projected. You can take a rock and it can become a vehicle, it can become a house, it can become a person, it becomes an idea. That capacity for projecting anything onto anything else is a fundamental creative component and fundamental to adaptability. I see a problem, I can metaphorically adapt it to something else, and that will help me find a solution. But we need those fundamental child at play qualities and skills. We need to reconnect with them as adults, because they are fundamental to our personal evolution and our collective evolution. Okay, that's the theory and the chat. Let's just touch base with what Julia Cameron does with it. I'll just turn my mind map over. Is everyone all right with what I'm saying so far?
Yeah, can we just have a little review? If you could maybe go on for another 10 minutes and opening it up to some questions. Yeah, that would be
absolutely. Really... So I'm now going to close the envelope, as we say, in order to create the case for the artist's way, and really this is my personal celebration of it. So I've explained why creativity is fundamental by taking it out of our lives and saying, what happens if we take creativity away? And we suddenly realize that it is both a component of the natural world, and because we're a part of it, it's important. It's a reflection of our reality, that it is about our personal evolution, and that it gives us certain qualities which are fundamental for our survival, both personally, in terms of our personal evolution, but also at a community and a society level. So creativity matters. It's fundamental. It's innate to everybody. It's something that needs to be kept alive throughout the whole of our lives. Why The Artist's Way? Why is it so good? So The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron was born of struggle. It came out of a difficult relationship that she was in with Martin Scorsese. She was a scriptwriter and editor. She had a toxic relationship with Martin Scorsese and his entourage. And what happened was, in a very short period of time, her creativity evaporated, her sense of self-worth evaporated. She went into deep depression and realized one day that this relationship was sucking the life out of her. She went off to a cabin in North California, I think it was, and without any plan, she spontaneously started to create personal practices. And this was really crawling out of the mud of depression. And what she found was that she created these routines and practices which really helped her to reclaim her creative soul. And she started to talk about this creativity recovery process with friends and recognized that she had something that was universal and useful, started to share it with friends, put on some talks, and then started to structure it, and eventually wrote The Artist's Way as a structured expression of her own recovery process from an extremely toxic relationship and set of circumstances. So it was born of struggle, which is often the way the best ideas come to us. It was a survival need. It's realistically structured. It goes through 12 weeks, which is a very realistic chunk of time to do something significant. It's a quarter of a year or a season. I think a seasonal cycle is very powerful. It also correlates to the recovery process of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't think that's a mistake. I think there's something universal in the approach numerically of 12 steps and the timescale that she went through with it. It's full of relatable quotes, and they're very important because they give perspective. Lots of amazing quotes throughout the book, which show you that the journey you're treading as you're doing the course is well trodden, and that's very comforting. And there are some great minds and great quotes in there. One of them is "Leap and the net will appear," and I've hijacked that for my own coaching practice. So my practice is called Leap, because it's based on the leap of faith, and this idea that the net appears when you have the courage to actually go for what you want and do what you need. It has a foundation practice in it, which is called the morning pages, where you spontaneously write 3 sides without editing, without censoring yourself. And so what it's doing is it's freeing up your need to express without being worried about what other people say, and you do it on the page. This is absolutely liberating. It's an astonishing thing to do. It also unlocks the gateway between subconscious and conscious mind. It reconnects you to your inner child at play, and I've just shown you why that matters. That's its fundamental directive, to reconnect you to your inner child at play. And anyone that's done this course and completed it has found a new lease of life, not just because they've suddenly found themselves doodling or writing or sculpting every day, but it has a knock-on effect in absolutely every aspect of your life. You're literally reborn through it. It is quite amazing. But you have to complete the course, and those that fall away have a fallen away experience of it. It helps identify inner blocks, and it does it superbly. It's really a very powerful self-help tool in showing you patterns of negative narratives in your mind and the way you hijack your own life. And it does it very clearly. It reconciles childhood loss. I don't think it's possible to go through in-depth psychology without a proper facilitator, a psychologist, psychotherapist, but this gets pretty close, and it does it in a very safe way. And the reason when I run the course that I also include one-to-one sessions alongside the group sessions on a weekly basis is because of that, to allow you to reflect a little more deeply on your own personal experience. And then the final thing that I've written here is it's all about change. Its fundamental directive dynamically is to create positive change in your life, and it understands change in the way that the I Ching does and Taoism does, and it recognizes that change is the natural function and quality of all life on earth, and that when you reconnect to the vitality of change and you engage with it in a way that's not resistant, magical things happen. And in fact, its biggest magic is that it creates synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity. That which you thought you would never find starts to become apparent very quickly. there we have it. Would people like to reflect back on my outpouring there? I hope it made sense. Anything at all you want to say? Pete, do you want to just host or just bridge between my rant and people's need to ask questions and reflect back?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. And we've got a tractor in the background here. Hopefully it's not too loud. Life on the farm. First of all, I'd like to offer you a keynote speech slot at the next camp out if I do another.
Absolutely.
I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And
Thank you.
There's so many jumping off points in what you've just said. I know Ken was saying difficult to take notes. I mean, we'll put a video up, obviously, of this if you're okay about that, because I think a lot of people could learn from it, and hopefully you get some recruits. I think you've got a couple of slots still to fill on the course. Two left. So we can get into the nitty-gritty of the course in a minute, but I'd like to invite anyone who has specific questions or observations to raise a digital hand. Kate's already got hers up, so Kate, over to you.
Yeah, I did keep dropping out. Really resonated. I just literally, on a little bookshelf by me, I have this workbook. I started it quite a few times, and it's incredible what comes out. You just do that morning thing, and I've given my book away many times. So I just think there's that the whole thing about being with nature, and there was so much. It was amazing what you said and what I heard. And I feel inspired to start anyway, but maybe explore. Yeah. What the question is, because I promised quite a bit. I just wanted to say it feels like the right time.
Let me positively encourage you to pick it up again. Really, it's all about staying the course. I mean, and that's why I'm facilitating. I had a comment from someone not that long ago saying, I charge to do this, and I charge because I'm a qualified coach and I'm a professional creative, but I charge because I understand the importance of turning up and holding space for a group of people for 12 weeks and then offering them time one-to-one as well. It's really important that you see it through, and a lot of people do drop out because it does some hard yards. You're going to meet yourself. And bizarrely enough, it's almost exactly the halfway point, weeks 5, 6, and 7, where it gets really tricky. And that's when most people fall away. That's when you need group energy, and that's when you need some one-to-one encouragement to keep going. If it wasn't hard, I don't think it would be worthwhile, because that's what happens. That's what personal evolution is about. You're going to meet difficult stuff. It sounds like it's absolutely the right time. I mean, I've given away so many copies as well, and I now have a PDF copy because I know I'll always keep it. It's on my hard drive permanently, but I highly recommend you get an original copy of the basic course. And obviously I'd love to see you on the course if you want to do it, and really just to reinforce this idea of keep going. The rewards are astonishing.
Just one other comment. It was just when you were just that connection with nature and synchronicity and things coming through, and oh God, I put it in the chat, but I just think there's such a massive need for this, because I've recently been working more and more with a university, and I tend to just do my own thing. For many years, I've just done my own with an organisation, and very much working in an emergent space. And it just strikes me that the mechanistic nature of the world that we're in, and I'm somehow a co-investigator on this massive regional bid that's going on, which is causing me flipping heartbreak. It's awful when an academic says to you, well, who said that? And it's like, I just said that. And it's like, it's only if it's a peer-reviewed academic journal that any comment more and more that, like, what is emerging is I think of it as the voice of the mother. It's like coming through, it's that drive, and it's incredibly painful straddling those worlds, actually. Anyway,
no, very valid points. I mean, you've identified the dogma of academia and the fact that dogma is fear-based, and this is an absolute antidote to all of that. And what happens is that you build personal confidence. in what you say, and comments from people that ask you to validate your viewpoint on things suddenly become irrelevant. They just evaporate before your eyes. It's like, you don't have to engage with that energy at all, other than, it's the difference between you saying, well, I said that from a place of fear, to I said that, and it's just like, you deal with it. That's your fear and your doubt that's popping up. This is an absolute antidote for that stuff. It really is.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Diane.
You're on mute, Diane. Hello, Diane.
Hi, back to my I don't know. Yeah, I've got all sorts of notes, but I don't want to rabbit on for a long time. I love the quote, "Brevity is handmade of convention." Where is that, one of your quotes, or is that from somebody else?
No, actually, that's I don't know the origins of that source. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it.
Okay.
It was an eminent person of some sort. I got it from an old teacher of mine who remains a mentor and good friend, Dave Hart, who was the youth tutor at my school. He basically dealt with all the troubled kids, the troublemakers, and those who didn't quite have a direction or a focus. And what he basically did was gave me the keys to the youth wing, which was a hut, which had a drum kit and some amplifiers and a stage on it. And he basically said, do what you want. Because he recognized I was a mind at work and I needed an application for my imagination. He quoted that to me about 5 years ago, and it really, really resonated, because I do understand the need for brevity, but I also see that it's about efficiency. And for that, he was a teacher at school, so he really understands how brevity as a concept through people who are setting curriculum is destroying originality, individuality, individual voice, youth voice, all the important components of the next generation. So it's a great thing to have in mind when someone wants to condense a complex idea to you, and you can just cut through and say, no, I don't care that we don't have time to go into detail. You cannot give me something in such short form when there's clearly an agenda behind the need to express it in short form. It's a way of busting other people's agendas.
Yeah, no, I could just see it useful in many contexts, which is great. The other things that popped into my head, so these are just my sort of randomy things. So one of them was Margaret Thatcher and her thing about trying to suppress people taking degrees in art and things. So that's one thing, because again, I mean, she was definitely a woman who walked in fear, amongst other things. In terms of what is, if we take creativity away, we can't actually function at all, because things like walking from A to B, you have to create a map in your mind in some way, shape or form to know how to get from A to B. Now, it's interesting when so many people are using, Google Maps or whatever to walk from A to B rather than actually trying to find their own way. So that's kind of just set some interesting stuff off in my head for other thoughts. And I mean, for years I've been involved in doing all sorts of stuff, running workshops and various topics and things, and the number of people who regard themselves as not being creative, and I would just be forever coming up with ideas of saying, well, you're creative because you bake, or you cook a meal, I mean, that these are all creative things, so yeah, creativity really important. I like the thought as well. Another jumping off point for me here is going to be spontaneity and finding synchronicity from spontaneity. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, anyway.
Shall I just reflect back on a couple of those points, just very, very briefly? So Thatcher, I totally get that. I mean, you could draw a comparison with what, I mean, dare I say it, this is a generally right-wing tendency to control the curriculum in order to control the way the next generation operates. And they do plan a generation ahead at a time. And the technocracy is just an extension of that, because the people who own the technocracy generally come from that ideology as well. So this is all about limiting freedoms. And it's always been about that, and satire and parody evolved as a sort of safety valve for that. And I actually challenge satire as being useful now, because it's just directing the steam, the creative steam of society in a way that it's mental triage, it's mental health triage for society, but it doesn't actually change things other than give us a focus. Maybe that's useful, but we need more than that. You mentioned about the map and getting from A to B. I mean, what you're describing, the minute you anyone who's used what's the automatic map system on phones called, sat nav, anyone who's done that and ended up in the wrong place realizes the shortcomings of a logical system of guidance. And there's that lovely quote, the map is not the territory. I mean, that is multi-layered. The map is not the territory. Your experience of life is very different from the description of your experience of life. And in the same way, a map is it's classic left brain, isn't it? A map is frozen in time. It's a frozen in time depiction of something. Your experience of traversing the terrain of that map is going to be very different to you sitting there looking at this frozen in time representation of it. And so it's all very well dealing with the data of life, but the experience of life is so radically different. And we are now in a paradigm where we're being encouraged to exchange in the facts and details and data of life without having the experiences. I mean, everything about the internet is replacing real for virtual, everything, and AI is the next iteration of that. So we must really be aware of what's going on, and I see the artist way as one very simple way of providing an antidote to it, and therefore creating a new narrative for people to share with other people. You do the artist way course, you've got something to talk to your children about in different ways, not literally, but just by drawing on its wisdom. And then the final thing you said about spontaneity and synchronicity, absolutely. I mean, that the link specifically between those two things came to me this morning when I was doing my list. I can't overemphasize how important spontaneity is. And isn't it interesting that spontaneous rebellion, it goes together. People that do things spontaneously often upset other people because they pull out of things at the last minute, or they change their mind, or equally, they might do something brilliant spontaneously. How often do we see a celebrity going against the conformed narrative of a broadcast by saying, actually, no, I'm going to speak out? Bob Geldof on Live Aid saying, fuck the phones, or whatever it was, you know, and basically what he was saying is, don't worry about the detail, I just want your hearts in this. And so spontaneity and synchronicity, that one flows to the other. And it takes courage. And I didn't mention courage in this talk, but actually courage is an absolute fundamental as to what Julia Cameron is unlocking in individuals. Liberty and courage.
Take the leap and the net will appear.
There we go. That's it.
Courage, as you put. I mean, I'd love to pick up after Ken's come in your point about hacking technology as well, and particularly in relation to running a social network, because you know we have got long form article possibilities. I'm just going to post one example when I did the thing on New Pagan Folk, where you can embed lots of different images and galleries and videos, and yet people still seem to use Campfire mainly in the short format capability. So how do we encourage people to get into longer articles is one question to put on the back burner for now, but something I'd like to touch on a bit later. Ken.
Yeah, like I said, and it may be because I'm in the United States and maybe we have different thought patterns and whatnot over here. Matt, I've known Pete from the music community for a long time. That's how I met him. And, you know, this has been a lot to absorb. I tried to take notes. It was very difficult. Some of the concepts I found very vague or I could not really understand. Have you written your own book, or was your course, is that basically based on Julie Cameron, who I've never heard of before? Not that that matters really.
No, I haven't written my own book. I'd love to. I've thought several times about evolving the artist's way. I mean, I think it's such a brilliant course that there's nothing to add. It's a bit like, you know, remix your favorite song and finding out that there's nothing that you can do that will improve on the original. I don't believe there is, but I do believe that there are some updates. And one of the reasons I'm facilitating it is to bring a contemporary perspective on it. And in particular, based on the research work that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, you know, just to say, actually, this really adds up now. It's suddenly really, really valid. The concepts.
The nature of creativity, is that like the basic summary of this? The nature of creativity, how it happens, what it does? Yeah. What is creativity? How does it happen in my life on a moment by moment basis? How can I liberate that quality within myself? It's a bit like reconnecting with the juice of life. It really is. You know, what is the thing that connects all living things? Well, it's some form, it's creative energy. One could go
quite a long way down the road to suggest that when we connect to our own creativity, we're connecting to the life force. And therefore, it's not a great leap of faith to say we're actually tapping into what it is to be God. When we create, we are God. God created everything. If whatever God is, and I'm not coming from any spiritual practice or religious perspective here, but this energy, let's call it the Tao, let's call it universal life force. Julia Cameron says good orderly direction is a synonym for, is that the word synonym? No, there's a, can't think of the word. Good orderly direction as the word God. And I think it's great. It's what it's suggesting is that there's a natural way that things want to go and can unfold. And when we tap into that, life is so much more harmonious. So really it's connecting to a fundamental life force and essence that is within us all. And it happens to manifest itself in creative practice. And we've got various ways we can do that, from music to writing to sculpting to doodling and noodling. There's no too big or too small in creativity.
I mean, I'm sure this is more like what we would call an essay question. As a music journalist, I'm very curious to know how you got from being mostly involved in music to being this kind of, I don't know what else to call it, philosopher. And I'm also
I take that as a compliment.
I'm also curious to know, and Pete, is going to realize this because I've known him for a long time, is have you ever worked with any of the people in the British folk rock community? Because that's my main passion. How do I stay in touch with you? Email?
Last question first. Yeah, email is probably the best way.
Sorry, can I just come in here? Matt is on Campfire, Ken, so you can just message him direct through the network.
Even
Matt
better.
Yeah.
British folk rock, no, not directly. Haven't worked with anyone specifically or directly in that scene. From memory, how have I become a creative philosopher, if that's what I am? Really, it was a way of consolidating a habit of mine to end up mentoring people accidentally and making it actually more considered and intended. I actually got into quite a few interpersonal messes by having this strong urge to want to see somebody grow through their own creativity. And it was often in working relationships, creative relationships, projects that I was working on. And it either came across as the wrong kind of thing. I was being too didactic or too controlling, or the other person simply didn't want someone else telling them what or how to do things. And it's like, why does this tension keep happening to me? Well, because I've got a desire to want to enable other people or empower other people creatively. And I've got all these experiences from a professional creative's life. How can I structure that so that it's useful rather than problematic? And so I took a coaching qualification, and it's given me a structure, and it's given me some structured thinking, just enough to have a container for a natural tendency to want to enable and empower others with their creativity. And I'm fascinated by creativity. Everything that I've talked about today, I find a massive personal interest, and I really believe that it's one of the antidotes to the hellish paradigm we're in at the moment with the technocracy and the way political socio-political trends are going. I think creativity is, it's the last bastion of personal and collective freedom. It really is.
You're very quotable.
Feel free.
Yes, lots of quotes in there. But I think another possible connection is, as a musician, particularly if you're playing in a band and with other musicians, there's a level of awareness. And that was one of the words that kept cropping up at Camp Out this year, just being aware. Same with the drum circle, your rhythm can complement it's all about deep listening and just the empathy of working with musicians around you. And I think with your coaching practice, and certainly my experience of it, there's a real sense of awareness. You can, from a few minutes of me talking, you can oversee where I'm at, and you can put it in a perspective for me that's very useful. So anyone who's working through issues or problems or feels stuck, I think could benefit very much from your influence and also this practice you're talking about.
Yeah, music is a really good case in point, actually. I think music, perhaps more than other disciplines, maybe dance and drama are the closest, But what music does above and beyond any other art form is it defines and destroys time. And that's a quote from a French philosopher whose name I'll have to look up. Defines and destroys time. So you become aware of time, and also I'm an arranger in music. Probably my biggest skill as a musician is to arrange other people's ideas. So all I'm doing is arranging other people's ideas when I work as a coach. It's like rearranging the jigsaw puzzle. Music gives you the capacity to see the time sequence of an evolution of ideas or problems. And so I can take a snapshot fairly easy, and that's definitely learned through music. The other thing that music teaches you is the notion of jamming, which is respectful, deep listening that doesn't deny you your own voice. You get to express yourself, but you learn to make space for other people. And that's really important in terms of being able to take on board somebody's path. I'll let you finish the solo, talking metaphorically. If you talk to me and you've got something you want to get to, I'll generally find a way to let you finish the solo before I start playing my riff again. You know, and that really has played out many times. When I was actually encouraged by another friend from the music business, Anthony McGee, who worked for Go Discs Records. He was an A&R man, A&R coordinator, and he became a coach.
The label for House Martins and Billy Bragg?
Quite possibly, yeah. I was working with a singer called Gabrielle at the time. I was her guitarist, and she was signed to Go Discs and Go Beat, I think, which was the dance offshoot of that. And Anthony said to me, why do you think you want to be a coach? I personally think you could be a very good coach, but why do you think you should be? And I wrote a list of things, and I suddenly realized that everything I'd done as a musician really helped me to become a coach. It was just the perfect training without ever intending it to be so. And deep listening is the central quality to all of that. Absolutely.
Could you put your email address in the chat?
Yeah, communicate with me through the Campfire page, and then I'll share emails with you on there. So let's go through the Campfire network first, and then I'll give you my personal email address there.
So a quick logistical question. If people are unable to, this is a weekly gathering, is it, your course?
Yeah.
And if people are unable to make particular dates, does that mean that they're not really going to be able to engage in the course, or is there a way around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can do this one of two ways. Ideally, we have a group of maximum 5 people. And the way I'm looking at it at the moment is to meet on a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. UK time. That's a weekly check-in for about an hour, possibly a little less. And then fortnightly, if you're part of that group, you then have a fortnightly one-to-one. And it's not worth doing a weekly one-to-one. There's not enough ground to cover. You need to go through the processes first before it's worth tuning with me. So you get a fortnightly one-to-one with me, and you get a weekly group session. Now, if you can't do that, I can simply work as a one-to-one coach with you, but it's just more expensive because it's more involved and it's more focused time extra to the group. The reason I set it up as a group was just to be cost effective, as well as the power of group work. You know, there's a lot to be said for the witness component of a shared experience, simply being seen and heard by other people on a combined, focused endeavor or quest is a really powerful experience to go through. But I can do one-to-ones, and I have done one-to-ones where I'll simply do a weekly check-in with you for each week of the course, and then you just work out, you know, a mutually convenient time. And I'm used to working across time zones. It's not always easy, but I've done it plenty of times, so it's not a boundary or a block. Are these meetings virtual or in person, or both? Virtual, yeah. Well, I mean, I've had an inquiry from somebody on the island in Paros to do it. Actually said they didn't want to do a Zoom session or virtual session. They wanted to do in person. So I'm going to see if I can coordinate with them to do that. But ideally, I'd have a group. Yeah, I mean, it's just not practical to do in person when you've got people all over the country and in different countries. So virtual is the way, and it works really well. You know, this is the practice. What you do on your own on a weekly basis is what you do on your own. I don't have to be there for that. And the course is extremely well laid out. I'll give you a very brief example. So every day you write 3 pages free form. It's called the morning pages. It's non-negotiable. It's absolutely vital that you do this. It doesn't matter if you don't have anything to say. You just write down the words, I don't have anything to say, until you fill 3 pages. The fact is, you're opening a gateway between subconscious and conscious mind, and you are getting used to expressing what you feel and think in the moment. It's an exercise in presence. And then every week there's a list of exercises. There we go. That's what you want, an A4 book and a sharp pen or pencil. There's weekly exercises, and they arrange from all sorts of things. They include going out to gather things. A lot of it is about attentiveness, what you notice and what you see. List writing, writing letters to old teachers or old people, people in your life who may have previously slighted you or blocked you, identifying blocks. It's tapping into what you love and what's got in the way of what you love. And he says right across the board, it's not just what I love in creativity, it's what I love in life. Absolutely everything. And what it's doing, it's revealing to you who you used to be and who you are now, and what's happened in between. And it's offering you a bridge between the 2 worlds. Very, very powerful. It's a broad practice. It does lots of little things. And then the reading, obviously you read a chapter each week, and her philosophical observations are a series of light bulb moments born of hard experience. She just nails it every single time.
Is she still doing this? Is this person still alive?
I think she's still alive. She's quite old now. She's not, I don't think she's actually actively promoting or working with, although she did an interview with Russell Brand not that long ago. If you look up Julia Cameron, Russell Brand, there's a YouTube interview, and that'll give you some insight into who she is and what she's done. Although I don't think actually on that interview, Russell Brand gives her quite the credibility that she deserves. That may be my memory of viewing it, but I thought he could have done a better job. But it still gives a great insight into it. I mean, multi-million selling international bestseller, not just the UK and America or Europe and America, but international bestseller. Quite an astonishing piece of work. And when someone can say to me, this is a better thing than The Artist's Way, I'll happily embrace it, but I haven't seen it yet or heard it yet.
Thank you, Matt. I think a book from you would be great if you can. I'm sure there are a lot of avenues for continuing this particular path. So I've just posted the link that you put on Campfire to The Artist's Way as a separate discussion topic. I've just bumped it to the top of the network so people
Hallelujah.
Find it easily. Thank you very much for everything you've contributed.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
We've not had a chance to check in. I've got some breakfast in 5 minutes being cooked for me, so maybe we could have a quick checkout from everyone. And I saw Kate posted earlier on the thread about I just need 1 sentence from you. Here I am about to ask everyone for 1 sentence to check out, but yeah, brevity. Thank you, Matt.